When she said, "Close the door, this isn't part of class," I knew something was about to change, and it had nothing to do with lessons on the board. The last of the students filed out, their chatter echoing faintly down the hallway until it dissolved into silence. I lingered at my desk, pretending to tuck away papers I didn't really need, though the truth was simpler. I didn't want to leave just yet. The classroom felt different once everyone was gone, as if the air itself exhaled in relief. Without 30 restless voices bouncing off the walls, the place became strangely intimate. She stood near the board, sliding a few stray pieces of chalk back into their tray. The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows, catching the faint gold in her hair and softening the lines of her face. For years I'd thought of her as untouchable, the kind of woman who belonged to another world entirely, calm, composed, always in control. But in that quiet, with the room emptied and the light falling over her shoulders, she didn't look like the teacher. She looked like someone I desperately wanted to know beyond her role. I gathered the stack of handouts she had left on the desk. "Do you want me to put these away for you?" I asked, my voice lower than I expected, almost cautious. She turned, surprised but not displeased, and gave me that small smile of hers, the one that always seemed to say more than words could. "Thank you," she said, walking closer. Her heels clicked softly against the tile, then stopped just a few steps from me. I reached to place the papers on the shelf, but when I turned back, her eyes were on me, steady, unreadable. There was no one else around, just her and me, and the faint hum of the overhead lights. The distance between us seemed suddenly thinner, fragile. And then she spoke, almost casually, but with a softness that made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. "Close the door." For a heartbeat I hesitated, unsure if I'd heard her right. But she held my gaze, and the corners of her lips curved, not quite a smile, not quite a command. "This isn't part of class," she added, her voice quieter now, meant only for me. I moved to the door, my hand brushing over the cool metal handle. As it swung shut, the hallway sounds faded away, until only the muted click of the latch remained. It was such a simple sound, yet it seemed to echo louder than anything else I'd heard all day. The classroom shifted in that moment. The light seemed warmer, the air heavier. I wasn't standing in a space meant for lectures and chalk dust anymore. I was standing in a room that felt secret, enclosed, ours. When I turned back toward her, she was watching me with that same unreadable expression. Except now, I thought I caught the faintest trace of something more, something I couldn't name, but I could feel deep in my chest. And just like that, I knew this was no longer about school, no longer about lessons. Something was beginning, though I didn't yet know what. She didn't return to the board or busy herself with papers. Instead, she settled on the edge of her desk, her posture relaxed in a way I'd never seen during class. Her crossed ankles swung lightly, the motion unhurried, like she had all the time in the world now that the room belonged only to us. I stood there, awkward at first, unsure if I should remain by the shelf or move closer. She solved that for me with a glance and a subtle tilt of her head, wordlessly inviting me to join her. I crossed the room slowly, the floor creaking faintly under my steps. "So," she began, her tone lighter than I expected, "what are you planning to do after all this?" Her hand waved vaguely toward the empty desks, as though she meant not just the class but everything, the hours, the years, the uncertain future waiting just outside these walls. I hesitated, shifting the papers still in my arms before setting them down beside her. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Some days I feel like I'm supposed to have it figured out. Other days," I gave a nervous laugh, "I just hope I'm not making the wrong choices." Her lips curved faintly, not mocking, but soft with understanding. "That never goes away, you know," she said. "Even when you're older, there's always another decision waiting to challenge you." Something in her voice caught me. Not the usual firmness I heard when she lectured, but something quieter, as if she were speaking from a place of experience, not authority. Her gaze drifted past me for a moment, and I wondered what crossroads she'd once stood at, what choices still lingered in her mind. I found myself studying her differently, not as a teacher at a desk, but as a woman sitting inches away. The sunlight had shifted, laying warm stripes across her blouse, catching the fine strands of hair that had loosened near her temples. She reached for a mug sitting beside her, absently running her finger along its rim. The simple gesture felt intimate, like a secret habit I wasn't meant to see. I leaned a little closer, almost without meaning to. "Do you regret any of them?" I asked. Her hand stilled on the mug. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between us, the kind that feels alive, heavy with thought. Then she exhaled softly. "Sometimes. But regret is tricky. It usually says more about who we were then than what we chose." She looked back at me, her eyes steady, and for a second it felt like the whole weight of her years of living pressed into that gaze. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "That's a lot wiser than I expected to hear today." Her laughter came then, low and unguarded. It wasn't the polished kind she used in front of everyone, but something warmer, softer, private. The sound stirred something inside me I couldn't name, and I realized I'd do almost anything just to hear it again. And in that moment, I stopped thinking of her as just a teacher. She was a person, complicated, thoughtful, and somehow, impossibly, letting me into a part of her world no one else seemed to notice. She reached for the book resting near her elbow, flipping it open to a page filled with notes in her delicate handwriting. The margins were lined with faint pencil marks, words circled, passages underlined. She angled it toward me without a word, and I instinctively leaned closer, drawn in by both the page and her presence. Our shoulders nearly touched as we bent over the same space. The air between us seemed to shrink, pressing us closer than felt safe. Her perfume, soft, understated, like jasmine and something earthier, drifted toward me. I caught it with every breath, each inhale pulling me deeper into awareness of her. "This one," she said, her voice quieter now, fingertips brushing against the margin of the page. "I've always thought it was overlooked." Her nail tapped lightly against the line she meant. I nodded, though truthfully, I was barely absorbing the words. My attention was on the curve of her hand, the fine lines of her wrist, the warmth radiating from her so close beside me. I shifted slightly, just enough that my sleeve brushed against hers. The contact was nothing more than fabric against fabric, but it sent a pulse through me that felt embarrassingly strong. I froze, half expecting her to draw back, but she didn't. She remained right there, her focus still on the book, as if the moment belonged to both of us and she had silently agreed to let it stay. Her hair, loosened from the long day, fell forward across her cheek. Without thinking, I wanted to reach out, to tuck it behind her ear. The thought alone made my chest tighten, and I gripped the edge of the desk instead. She leaned just slightly closer, her voice dropping unconsciously as though we were conspiring together over the words. "Do you see what it means? It's not just about the surface, it's about what's left unsaid." Her sentence struck me in more ways than one. I wasn't sure if she realized how perfectly it mirrored what was happening between us. What's left unsaid. The silence humming beneath her words was louder than anything else, and I couldn't help wondering if she felt it too. I glanced at her, letting my eyes linger a fraction longer than appropriate. Her lashes lowered as she traced the page again, and the faintest smile touched her lips, the kind of smile that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing, or perhaps exactly what I was feeling. My throat tightened. I forced myself to answer, though my voice came out softer than intended. "Yeah. I see it now." She looked up then, and for a heartbeat, our eyes met at a distance too close to hide anything. The book between us was no longer the focus. It was simply an excuse, a fragile tether keeping us from admitting how close we had allowed ourselves to be. And though either of us moved away, the unspoken truth hung in the warm, sunlit air. The lesson we were sharing had nothing to do with ink on paper. The book lay open between us, but she closed it softly, her fingers pressing against the cover as if sealing something inside. For a moment, her gaze dropped, not at me, not at the desk, but somewhere inward, like she'd wandered into her own thoughts. When she spoke again, her tone was different. Not the light curiosity she'd carried earlier, but something quieter, weightier. "You know, people don't realize how exhausting it can be to always be the one in charge," she murmured. Always the one expected to know everything, to never stumble. Her words caught me off guard. I'd always thought of her as unshakable, firm when she needed to be, collected in every situation. Seeing that confidence bend, even slightly, felt like watching sunlight filter through a crack in a wall. It startled me, but it also drew me closer. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, careful not to interrupt what felt like something rare, something she wasn't used to sharing. She sighed softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Sometimes it feels like I'm invisible outside these walls. Everyone assumes I have it together, but… She stopped herself, then gave a quiet laugh, almost embarrassed. I shouldn't be saying this to you. But I shook my head, leaning forward, my voice low. No, you should. I mean, it's okay. You don't have to carry it all by yourself, not right now. Her eyes lifted to mine, and the vulnerability there made my chest tighten. For once, she wasn't the teacher correcting, guiding, or holding authority. She was just a woman, lonely, uncertain, human. And she was trusting me enough to show it. The air between us grew thicker, heavy with what wasn't being said. I wanted to reach for her hand, to anchor her somehow, but I held back. Instead, I said her name softly, not as a student, but as if I were testing the weight of it on my tongue, giving it back to her stripped of titles and expectations. Her lips parted, as if she might answer, but no words came. She just looked at me, really looked, her gaze traveling over my face like she was memorizing it. That moment stretched into something fragile, intimate. The distant sound of lockers slamming in the hallway barely reached us. The world outside felt dim compared to the quiet pulse of connection filling the space. Finally, she smiled, faint but real. You're different, she said softly. Most people don't listen. Not really. But you do. Her words settled in my chest like a secret I was meant to keep safe. And as her eyes lingered on mine, the divide of years, of roles, of rules seemed to thin until it was barely a thread between us. For the first time, I felt she wasn't just letting me stay in the room. She was letting me into her life, into a place she rarely allowed anyone to see. The stack of folders sat between us, one slightly slipping toward the edge of the desk. She reached for it at the same time I did, our hands colliding in the middle. The contact was brief at first, skin against skin, but neither of us moved away. Her hand was warm, the touch light yet steady, and for a heartbeat I forgot how to breathe. My fingers curved instinctively, not gripping but hovering close enough that if I shifted just a fraction, I could lace them with hers. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, thick with all the things we weren't saying, all the lines neither of us dared cross yet. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed louder, the world outside the closed door impossibly far away. I glanced up, half expecting her to pull back, to re-establish the space between us. Instead, she lifted her eyes slowly, meeting mine. Her pupils were darker in the late afternoon light, her expression unreadable yet charged with something that made my chest ache. Neither of us spoke. Words would have felt clumsy, almost dangerous. What lived in that pause was too delicate to name. I became acutely aware of everything, the faint brush of her sleeve against my wrist, the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle shift of her lips as if she was about to say something but held it back. My heartbeat was a drum in my ears, and I wondered if she could hear it too, if she noticed how unsteady I had become. Her fingers twitched slightly against mine, the smallest movement, but it was enough to ignite a rush through me. Not bold, not deliberate, just enough to show she felt the moment too. My throat tightened. Every instinct told me to lean closer, to close the fragile distance, but I held myself still, terrified of breaking whatever fragile trust we had created. She exhaled, the sound soft and controlled, but her eyes didn't leave mine. You're quiet, she said finally, her voice no louder than a whisper. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my words hushed, careful. I'm afraid I'll ruin it. Her lips curved, just barely, a smile that wasn't amusement but understanding. Not everything needs words. The truth of it pressed into me harder than anything she'd said before. Not everything needed words. Some things lived in silence, in the touch of a hand, in the kind of gaze that lingered too long. Our hands stayed there, suspended together over the folder, until the weight of the moment became almost unbearable. At last, she pulled back gently, her fingertips sliding against mine in a way that felt intentional, like a promise wrapped in restraint. The loss of contact left a strange emptiness in its place, but her eyes held me steady. And in that look, silent, lingering, full of meaning, I realized the lesson she had been teaching all along had nothing to do with the classroom. It was about what remains unspoken, yet impossible to ignore. The silence after she withdrew her hand lingered, almost aching in its absence. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady the pulse still racing through me. She seemed calmer than I was, composed, though I caught the faintest trace of something unsettled in her eyes, as if she too was carrying the weight of the moment we had just shared. She lifted a hand to brush a loose strand of hair from her face, but it fell back almost immediately, grazing her cheek. She gave a small, exasperated smile at herself, that rare, unguarded expression I'd grown to crave. Before I could think better of it, I moved, reaching up gently, carefully, my fingers brushing her temple as I tucked the strand back behind her ear. The touch was light, no more than a whisper against her skin, but it sent warmth spiraling through me. Her cheek was soft beneath my fingertips, warm from the sunlight spilling in through the windows. For a moment she didn't move, didn't pull back. Instead, her eyes fluttered shut briefly, as if savoring the smallness of the gesture. When she opened them again, they were softer than I had ever seen, no shield of authority, no careful composure. Just her, raw and human, looking at me in a way that made my chest tighten. "You're braver than you think," she said quietly. I swallowed, my hand lowering slowly, but the imprint of her skin lingered against mine. "That didn't feel brave," I murmured. "It felt necessary." Her lips curved faintly, and this time it was undeniably a smile, though touched with something tender. She leaned forward, not enough to close the gap between us, but enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her presence settle around me. The room seemed impossibly still. Dust motes floated lazily in the golden light, the ticking clock on the wall forgotten. What mattered was this: her nearness, the gentleness of her voice, the way she allowed me to see her not as a teacher, not as someone distant, but as a woman inviting me into a quiet corner of her life. I let out a nervous laugh, the kind that slipped free when words weren't enough. "If anyone walked in right now," I trailed off, realizing how dangerous the thought sounded, and yet unable to stop myself from finishing. "They wouldn't believe this was happening." She tilted her head, studying me with that thoughtful look that always felt like she saw deeper than anyone else. Then, softly, she reached out and let her fingertips graze my shoulder, a fleeting touch that steadied me more than any reassurance could. "No one has to," she said. "This moment is ours." Her touch was brief, but it settled into me like an anchor. And in that simple closeness, the brush of her cheek against my fingers, the warmth of her hand on my shoulder, I realized something profound: intimacy didn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes it was found in the quiet courage of simply reaching out. Eventually, the silence softened, settling into something less heavy, more comfortable, like the quiet that lingers between two people who don't need to fill the air with words. She drew in a breath, then slowly stood, smoothing the fabric of her blouse as though steadying herself. I straightened too, unsure of what would come next, afraid that the fragile thread we had woven might break now that the moment had shifted. But instead of retreating behind her desk, she stepped closer. Her hand lifted lightly, almost hesitantly, before resting against my shoulder. The warmth of her touch seeped through my shirt, grounding me. "Thank you," she said softly. Her tone carried more weight than the words themselves, as though she wasn't thanking me for stacking papers or staying late, but for something deeper, something unspoken. I swallowed, my chest tight. "For what?" I asked. Her gaze held mine, steady and sincere. "For seeing me. Not as a role. Not as what everyone expects me to be. Just me." The words lodged in my throat. I wanted to tell her how natural it felt, how I couldn't look at her any other way now. Instead, I just nodded because sometimes honesty didn't need eloquence, it just needed presence. She gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze, then let her hand linger for a heartbeat longer before lowering it. The gesture felt like both a reassurance and a boundary, an acknowledgement that what had passed between us mattered, even if it would never be spoken aloud outside this room. I turned toward the door, my hand brushing over the cool metal handle. For a moment, I hesitated, reluctant to break the cocoon of warmth we'd created. Behind me, she hadn't moved. I could feel her watching, the weight of her silence pressing against my back. When I finally opened the door, the click of the latch seemed louder than before, a reminder that the world outside was waiting, bright, noisy, indifferent. The hallway stretched empty, filled with the faint smell of chalk and the echo of distant voices. Yet stepping through, I carried something with me that no one else could see. I glanced back once more. She was still standing by the desk, her figure framed in the golden light slanting through the windows. And then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. Not the polished smile of a teacher, but something warmer, gentler, private. It was a smile meant only for me. I held it in my chest as I stepped into the hallway, the door easing shut behind me. The world felt different now, heavier with secrets, lighter with possibility. Her touch still lingered faintly on my skin, and her words echoed in the back of my mind, "Thank you for seeing me." And I knew I would carry both with me, quietly, like a flame hidden in my hands, something small, fragile, but enough to light every shadow I might face beyond that classroom. If this story touched you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more slow burn romance stories. Share it with someone who loves age gap romance, and let me know in the comments what part stayed with you the most.